I'm an addict. My name's CJ. CJ! Wow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody that's involved with this thing. It's been a long time coming. 6 years. Thank you for making this thing happen. And like Jimmy said, the guy that I'm introducing, through my travels, and I've been blessed, to be able to experience many different countries. And through that, the one thing I've learned is that Narcotics Anonymous is like the mafia. We got family everywhere. But if you leave, you die. And along the way, I was in Birmingham. I'm not sure if it was the UK convention or if it was the European convention in Birmingham. And that's when I met the two twins. And we just became the greatest of friends. He invited me up to his place. I didn't go for the first year or two. But he always asked me, do you know Dan T? Do you know Dan T? And he spoke at the spiritual retreat in the Keys. And he told me the story about how he got a tape of his, and he kept listening to it every day, and it kept him clean. And I said, well, I got a bracelet like this from the Keys. I said, you want it? And it was like, you would think I gave him Jimmy K's autographed basic text. He was like a little kid, and he started crying. He was so happy that I gave him this gift, we went to many different conventions in different countries, but one of the things that I've learned when I travel overseas, and it blows me away sometimes. He has me to his house, and I said, where do I sleep? And he says, well, you sleep in my bed, I sleep on the couch. That's the type of guy he is, man. You're getting ready to... This guy is such a special... Anybody that meets him just loves this guy. He is one of the nicest guys I've ever met in Narcotics Anonymous. And we're blessed tonight to have David. Come on, brother.
Thank you. Wow. Yes. I'm so sorry for the people behind me. It's going to be really hard for me twisting. I'm not as young as I used to be. And Bob said I've got to face these or something, but wow. Just taking a moment. Look at that. Look at the sea just there, and I watched the sun go down earlier. Oh, the guy, I hope he's not fell out the tree. I seen him sat in the tree there. We make do, don't we? We make do. We make do. Woo! I remember I've been asked to speak in a couple of different meetings and a couple of conventions, and I don't know about you guys, and it doesn't matter the longer I've stayed here, I still get that stomach, and it's churning, and I always identify it as like anxiety, or like fear and nerves. And some young guy said one day, he was only a newcomer guy, and he said, remember out the mouths of babes, he said, that feeling you get in your stomach, and it's the anxiety stuff, and I'm like, yeah, and that's what I've got. And he said, yeah, and then it tingles and tingles. I said, yeah, and he said, it's just like being excited, isn't it? I thought, where did he get that from? But you know what? It really is true. If you've ever felt excited, it is very similar. So I try now today to flip it. Instead of feeling that I'm feeling anxious, and trying to think that I'm feeling excited. And you know what? Why wouldn't I be excited? I'm in the Florida Keys. I'm clean.
I'm excited.
I'm excited. I'm clean. I'm I'm in another part of the world and with people who love so much. Thank you, CJ. I've got so many people I know today I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. All of us in Narcotics Anonymous, you know, all the way back from Jimmy Kay and the guys, all the way up to this present day. And I know there's people here in this audience who's been around for a lot of them years. And you know what? I'm so grateful. So please, let's give a hand for the predecessors who's got it and kept it going. Give us a place to stay. I'm one of them addicts. I wouldn't be here, me, because I heard a recording of Jimmy speaking once, and he said, it's not about us, it's about the people who's not got here yet. And I'm one of them. If it wasn't for Jimmy and the guys before me, NA would have never made its way to the UK. It would have never made its way to all the different countries it is in the world today if it wasn't for the people who went before. So I'm so grateful for that. Wow. Oh God, I tell you what, I did a couple of that, sitting thinking about what I'm going to say and whatever, and then I'm so grateful they didn't give me a topic. I'm not bad at talking about myself, but when they give you a topic, I was saying to one of the guys earlier, they give me a topic once, just as I got to the speaker jam, they said, David, you know what your topic is, don't you? And I was like, no one said topic to me. And they said, the topic is love and the fellowship. And I was so angry, but all of a sudden I took a breath and I thought, love, fellowship. I said, you're the fellowship and I love you. And I looked at the guy and said, is that okay? And then I was able to do and speak about my favourite subject, me. Hey, nothing's changed, my clean date is 11/11/08, and I think when I come in here, my twin shares this, it's so funny, he says, when I come here I was 99.9% selfish and self-centred. I've been here now 14 and near on half a years, and I'm 97.9% still selfish and self-centred. But that little bit has been so massive in my life. It's been able to give me positive concern for others, and that's something what I always had, but drugs took it away. Listening to CJ saying them kind words and the people I'm with, I know that I'm loved today. I know that I can give love. And my mum always looks at me and says, I knew that you was good underneath all that. And I know I believe it today. I've got that belief. Even though they asked me in the car earlier on to say 5 good things about myself, and it's got stuck on 2. And it helped me out. So I think first of all, I always have to do this and it's so good to see so many young people. Yeah. I love coming to Florida. Me, and my first experience of Florida, I'll get to it soon, but was in the meeting, 7th Heaven. Yeah. And Jimmy was there, I remember, I'll never forget, but I was sat at the table waiting to speak, and there was just more people come in, and there was nobody in there other than us. It was over 25, and it was just so humbling. And that's why the fellowship is being able to continue growing, is because of the diversity of our members and our meetings. And I welcome any addict to come and get recovery with us guys in Narcotics Anonymous. Disclaimer, and I really think it's important that I say this, because a lot of people when they come into recovery, they think they can't ever identify that they liked using drugs. Well, I did. That's why, and I had to think, why did I stay here? And there's a funny story in England, and I hope some of you get this, but I know some will. When I come into recovery, I'd been a cracking heroin, injecting methadone for near on 20 years. Alcohol was the first drug I ever used. It was the last drug I ever used. I was like, I took anything. If you give me a tablet and I didn't know what name it was, I would try it. I would try anything. And I always believed that being an addict meant that you took some of them really bad drugs. you know, that you took heroin, or you'd ended up on the street, or you was a junkie. They was the kind of beliefs I had, because it talks about it in the basic text, doesn't it, that, you know, about dirty needles and street crime. And that was how I was. And I remember coming in and reading in the basic text, and there was an addict, it says, it's our reaction to drugs that makes us addicts, not how much we used. And that is amazing to think that it wasn't what drug I took what made me an addict. You know, and I've met people in this fellowship who's used drugs from all different types. I've worked with people, I've sponsored people who took drugs I never even got a chance to have. You know, and I do get a little jealous. We had a guy in this new to the meetings, and he was in treatment, and the drug he had was these pads what the ladies take the nail varnish off the fingers with, and he had to rub the pads together, and the dust what come off, that was his drug. And the people had to watch him going down the makeup aisle. Instead of watching the guys at the liquor aisle, they was watching him on the makeup aisle. And he got caught with 2 packs in his room and got kicked out of treatment because of it. So what I did when I found out that it was the reaction to drugs that made me an addict and not how much I used, I did a bit of time travelling, because that's what we do in Narcotics Anonymous. When we get a sponsor and we start looking at ourselves through the process of the steps, we go time travelling. And one of the things I wanted to find out was if it was the reaction to drugs that made me an addict. When did that kind of happen? When was that evident? When was the evidence for me that something had happened what was different? And I've made it back to being about 12, 13, and I was at a party from school, and I was with my twin, and I'll get to that as well. I'm an identical twin, and me and him were thick as thieves. We did everything together, and we've ended up in this party, and I'm just sat underneath the optic, and I'm just plugging vodka and gin, whatever would come out of it, drinking it. And now I can't remember a whole lot of that night, but what I do remember, I had a big smile on my face. I heard someone share that they lit up like a Christmas tree, and I said, that's what happened to me. I lit up like a Christmas tree. I identify that today as maybe the first example of when I had this reaction, this abnormal reaction, what was different to other people. I didn't know it at the time, because I thought everybody in that room was having the same reaction as me, but they wasn't. Some of them was, but I'd had this reaction, and somehow I fell, a gravel had all my face was ripped up, and my twin had done the same, and we ended up getting home, and my older brother had got us in, and I woke up in my bed in the night, and I would wet the bed. I didn't know that wouldn't be the first time that I did that, and I was sat there, plasters on my face, because I knew my mum loved me, but I knew she was going to kill me in the morning. She was going to kill me, and she was going to keep me in for a week. We always got kept in for a week if you ever got caught drinking. But I knew something had happened. All I could think about was, when am I going to get another go at that? When am I going to get another lit up like a Christmas tree? When am I going to have that reaction? Because I know from that day, or from round them days, using was always the priority. It was always the plan. And we didn't get to use every day. And alcohol we couldn't use, because if you used alcohol you got kept in for a week. But just like the good addicts, we're not stupid. I've never met a stupid addict. We do stupid shit, but we're not stupid, and we find ways and means. And I found different cocktails and concoctions of mixing this and mixing that, and I found the drugs what I liked. And in the beginning there was a lot of cannabis, and we had it in resin so we could make hot knives, and that was like burning them on red hot knives. It was really good. And I remember sharing once that we had petrol, and someone come up to me and said, David, drinking petrol must have been bad. I said, I didn't drink it. I was sniffing it, huffing it, you call it. And petrol was good, because you'd go home and my mum would smell petrol and she'd go, oh, you've been playing with the motorbikes. She was good. If you smelt of alcohol, in for a week. Smelt of petrol, a pat on the back. You know what I mean? It was good. And and at the time, You know, the teachers were telling us drugs were bad. You know, parents are telling you drugs are bad. You know, Ronald Reagan was saying, just say no. All that stuff, everyone's saying drugs are bad, and we're just laughing, saying, oh my God, you don't know which drugs we're having, because the ones we're having are really good. And then that was what it was like. Why would we stop doing something what was paying us off? I had to realise that, I had to look at that. Because if I didn't acknowledge that that's how strong the addiction had me, why would I have carried on? And why, when I tried to stop, would I not be able to stop? I had to really realise the magnitude of this disease that I suffer from. You know, and I stumbled on me from then. In them early days, I believe the camaraderie we had, the gang of people who I'd knocked around with, we was tight. We'd do anything for each other. We went to jail for each other. We spiked each other. That was a good thing. But always you had one as well. If you ever spiked anyone, the deal was you had to have one. And we did that. We shared everything. Everything was like, it was the best. And even though all the people over there was looking at us as if, what are you doing to your life? We're thinking that we've got it right and you've got it wrong. And that was how it was. I had to acknowledge that. So anybody who's coming here and feels like they don't want to acknowledge that they used to like using drugs, it's okay to acknowledge that. But then, like it says here, headed in the right direction, I have to acknowledge, and it says it in the basic text, we had no indication for the nightmare the future held for us. I know that today, but I didn't know it at the time. I have to look as well, and I've got a lot of acceptance today that, you know, I didn't get this message when I was younger. You know, I didn't get it when I was as young as some of the people who's here. I have to accept that I had to go to that place to get to this one. And I really believe that, you know what, me doing that and now being able to carry a message means that other people don't have to. I've got to believe that that's the only good what's come from where I've been. So right from the beginning, using every opportunity I could, different types of drugs. I didn't know it, I was always going downhill, I was always heading in the wrong direction. I didn't know it, you know, it felt good, you know, and we'd have some wins, you know, we'd get onto a good graft and be making money. But the reality was, I'd stopped any chance of getting a proper job. I was living as a criminal. You know, unfortunately, prisons was part of my story. You know, bloodborne diseases, hepatitis C, you know, relationship breakups. I know I got married in active addiction. You know, I got married on Valentine's Day. I always say I only did it so I only had to buy one card. And I got my divorce papers in the prison. You know, and I always remember the guy coming in to give me my divorce papers, and they shouted me on the wing and they said, come on Dakin, you've got to visit. And I was like, no, my mum's not up this weekend, I'm not going out. And we always put our eyebrows down in jail. Walk with your eyebrows down like that until you get in the cell on your own, and then you can cry. But on the landing, your eyebrows down. And anyway, they told me it was the visit was going to be okay, it wasn't the police. And I went on, and it was this old guy, and he stood in front of me and he said, could you sit down please? And I said, no I won't, who are you? And he took a dead deep breath, I always remember it, and he said, I'm George blah 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 from Cheshire County Court, I'm here to serve your divorce papers on you. And I just went, oh, where do I sign? That's great, that. And he just went, oh my God. And he fell back into his chair. And the right of my eye, I caught all the officers was in the window laughing their heads off. And I said, oh my God. I said, are you okay? I said, listen, it's okay. I said, we've been split up for 2 years, man. This is the formality. And he said, oh my God. He said, I drawn the short straw to come here today. I was so thinking you was going to kick off and it was going to be horrible. And he said to me, right, are you finished? I said, yeah. He said, right, I'll be going. I said, you won't. I want a can of Coke and a Mars bar, man. You just got me off the wing. But yeah, but relationships, you know, anything what was meant anything in active addiction I lost. You know, and the things I did to get my drugs got worse and worse. You know, and just a little example of powerlessness. I had one time, you know, I don't know if you do that much here, but you know, when you're really on Skid Row and you've got a flat, you've got a home, you know, drug dealers like to have somewhere to sell from. And I had allowed this girl and her boyfriend, who'd come from the big city Manchester, and he was doing some rocks from my flat, and I would be lucky if I got a few of them through my way. And anyway, something happened and they disappeared, and I was sat one night and I had no drugs, and it was a ball of amphetamines, and I don't like amphetamines, I never liked what they did for me, but this ball of amphetamines and their used needle box sat there. And I know, you know, I didn't know about powerlessness, I didn't know about the disease of addiction, but my best thinking was to open up that box, this hypodermic needle box, which should have been going into, you know, to be disposed of and furnace, and I opened it up, and I ended up injecting every single bit of that ball of amphetamines. It might have been about 15 different injections with blunt needles what could have had any kind of disease in, and I didn't like that drug, and I used every single bit of it. And I remember feeling so bad once I'd done it, but for doing it, it was all I could do, you know. So I know what it's like to use against my will and to do things, you know, that I wouldn't normally do. The disease of addiction had robbed me from everything I had. Had dwindled me down to, you know, I remember I come across Narcotics Anonymous. I went into a meeting, and the guy who was doing the chair was my old drug dealer, my old connect, who I really looked up to, and he said to me, "You need not use again." And I thought, you cheeky bastard, how can you say that to me? And I left that meeting thinking that there's something else what doesn't work. I disqualified myself. I couldn't see the message because I was so wrapped up in the personality. My life carried on getting worse and worse for a couple more years, until eventually, I believe it today, that the gift of desperation was bestowed upon me. I blessed the grace of the God of my understanding, because up till that day I didn't know this. I'd been trying to think my way out of a thinking problem. I really believed that I was going to work this out. I knew that I wasn't as bad as what I thought I was. I knew I wasn't as weak as all the people what they was telling me. But every single time I stopped, I couldn't stop myself from starting again. So I felt weak. And I ended up, there was a guy in my town who I used to use with, and now he set the first Narcotics Anonymous meeting up in my town. And he just looked at me and said, "Have you not had enough yet?" And something dropped. I had money in my pocket. I just used. I could have got more. And for the first time, I put my hand up and said yes. Something happened. I didn't know what had happened. I just felt really confused. And he said to me, give me 6 things he wanted me to do. And I didn't want to do them. One of them was to connect back with my mum and ask her could I move back home. I had a busted eye. One of them was that he wanted me to go to the hospital. And for some reason, I believe it now, for this gift of desperation, I followed his direction and I did these things. That was on the 31st of October 2008. And my mum took me in, and because I'd had a fit in the past coming off alcohol, I put down the methadone, I'd stopped using, and I'd done a couple of days tapering off on the alcohol. And the 10th I was in an operation, the 10th of November. The 11th of November I woke up in my mum's house and she said, "David, you've still got a couple of days left." And I said, "I don't want them." So that's why the 11th of November is my clean time date. And by the grace of God I've never used since then. So, but how did I stay here? This is the most important thing for me. See, when I first come here to Narcotics Anonymous, one of the things in this guy who gave me the suggestions, one of them was to go back to that meeting what had been 3 years previously. I went back in there. This time my ears were open. You know, a woman, God rest her, she's still around, but she's not too well at the moment. She explained the first step to me in the disease of addiction. It says it in our basic text, who's an addict. You know, some of us are relieved to find out we have a disease and not a moral deficiency. That was me. I was so relieved. I was so relieved to know that, you know, I wasn't so stupid. I wasn't spineless. I wasn't weak. And sure enough, you know, I was loved. You know, the people in the meetings loved me. I met my sponsor very, very early on. He said to me, don't put me on a pedestal. He's still my sponsor today, 14 years later. He said, don't put me on a pedestal. And he said, tomorrow we've got a public information workshop. Do you want to come? It's what we do. I'm so blessed he did, because service is so important in my life today, and it's so important part of our program. Now, in them first few months, I was so happy being clean. I didn't have to go out committing crime. I'd started making inroads to see my son. I'd started making inroads into my health issues. I was, taking interferon, and I was happy with it. Not many people are, but I was. And that was good. And it was about 2009, say maybe June 2009, I'd already been to the Merseyside Convention. Well, it was the North West England and North Wales Area Convention, and I'd seen Anthony speak there. I'd started making my, friends in NA, and I'd been to the first Birmingham, and I was just happy being clean. But I put limitations on my recovery, and I didn't know it at the time because I'd never talked about it. I believed by being a criminal and being a drug addict for so many years that I was disqualified from ever joining mainstream life. I really didn't think that I was allowed to do that. And like CJ mentioned, in about June 2009, I got a speaker link, a link to a share, and this guy was sharing that he was sat on a white pristine beach in a Caribbean inlet, and my ears pricked up. And he was sharing from 2007, so it was only 2 years previous. And then he went on to say that he was sat on the beach, and on the right of him was a volleyball game going on, and on the left of him was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting going on. And he said he just looked up at the sky and said, how did I get here? How did I get here? And then he opened up his basic text, and this was what was really important for me, because I'd started studying my basic text. I'd started reading it, and I so knew that what was in it was so important, and I could see myself in it. And he opened it up in More Will Be Revealed, and he read out that if we had written down a list of our expectations when we first came to the program, we would have been cheating ourselves. Hopeless living problems had become joyously changed. Our disease has been arrested, and now anything is possible. And when he said that anything was possible, the hairs on my arm stood up. The tingle on the back of my neck, I can still feel it today. He said anything was possible, and all of a sudden I started to have a little thought in my head. A little tiny little belief opened that maybe there was just a little bit more on offer in this program than just being clean and staying clean. And all of a sudden I started to look outside the box then. I started looking outside the box, so I said to my sponsor, he was an accountant, and I remember saying, hey Rob, accountant and that, like, did you always do that? Is that what you did before you come into recovery? And he said, no, he said, I'd come into recovery with fuck all, and excuse me, he said, and then I got here, and I went to college, and I got the qualifications. So I looked around again, and there was Jason. He was a really good friend, but he had a BMW, a lovely wife, and a house and a baby, and he was an IT specialist. And I remember saying, did you do that, Jason, at school? Have you always been into it? He said, no. He said, I come out of prison with a bin bag of clothes what wasn't mine. And I've started to realise that people don't come into Narcotics Anonymous on a winning streak. Do you know what I mean? I started to realise that all these people who had nice cars in the car parks and the nice clothes on, generally they didn't get here like that. And I know that some people do. Lucky, I'm not going to say. But I was one of them people, I come in here with nothing, and all of a sudden I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a life on offer. So I started to I took the suggestions. I was already working steps. I already had my sponsor. I was already attending regular meetings, and I already was being a service. You know, them steps, service and step work and sponsorship and regular meetings, the same, the NA rap they call it, don't it? It's the same suggestions what was given to our predecessors are the same ones we pass on today. And I kept them right in the middle of everything. But now I started to look outwardly for the things that I could do to better myself as a human being as well. And I went to college, started studying, and I started to travel a little bit more. I went to conventions a little bit further afield. And every time I bumped into anybody from America, I would ask them that question. Do you know Dan T from Citrus Heights in Sacramento? And he would look at me and say, David, America is a big place. You wouldn't believe how many times that happened. But I kept going to meetings, I kept being of service, and as my world started, our convention in 2014, my area convention, the theme was unified, anything is possible. Directly from that share. And by now, my identical twin brother had come into recovery. I knew if he got here, he would get it, and sure enough, he did. And so I introduced him to Dan's share. You know, all the people in my home group used to listen to it. And so sure enough, as my world's getting bigger, you know, I'm going to conventions. I even went to the World Convention in Rio de Janeiro in 2015. Wow, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I could go on a wide body there. I'd never been on an aeroplane when I got here. Because he said anything was possible. I got myself a car license. I got myself a job. It still sounds mad saying the word job. It come up on my memories today. That 12 years ago to the day I started my first employment in recovery, and you know I've worked continuously every day since. I've never been out of work. That is alien. I'd never worked from being 18 all the way to 40. I was so scared going for a job interview that I had nothing to offer. So I'm there going to these conventions, I'm starting to get about, but every time I see someone from America, I ask them, do they know Dan T? They say to me, David, America's a big place. And then one day, in 2015, one day, I was looking at that social media site, which we're not affiliated with, but it's blue in colour. And this guy from the UK is in America, and he's stood next to another guy, what's called Dan T. And I'm typing furious. Is that Dan T from Citrus Heights, Sacramento? And he texts back to me, is his wife called Ruth? And I said, that's him! And sure enough, it was him. And my friend told him about me and how much his share had inspired me, and he couldn't believe it. He was so overwhelmed as well, and he got in touch with me, and we talked on chat first, and then we talked, and then he said to me, if you can get to London in September, David, he said, I'm sharing at Paris. Imagine this guy was going to speak in Paris, which you guys might think's near to London, but it's in a different country. It's a bit, you know, you have a think about Napoleon on his own. Anyway, he said, if you can get to London, me and my wife Ruth, we're going to come under the tunnel and we're going to meet you in London. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was leaving my home in Warrington, and I was driving in my car. It was only a Ford Focus, an old one, but it was mine and it had my name on it. And I was driving there. I was so full of gratitude because the people I looked up to were the drug dealers and the gangsters. You know, Goodfellas was my favourite film, and I thought my dad was a gangster. And he wasn't, he was a cooked meat salesman, but he used to walk like a gangster. He looked like Robert De Niro, so he must have been a gangster. And my twin brother, I wanted to be my twin. I never wanted to be, some humble guy. I always thought that was weak, but this man was so humble, and I was so looking forward to meet him. And I got to London, and sure enough, he come up with his wife, and it was amazing. He brought me a hoodie. He brought me a hoodie over that from the California Republic with an NA symbol on the service symbol on the arm, and my name and clean time date embroidered in it. It was amazing. It's one of my most cherished things. And it's great. And my clean time date's 11/11, so you can't get it wrong. See, in the UK we do ours differently to you, the opposite way round. But thankfully it didn't matter, because 11/11. So it was so nice when we spent the day together in London. We went to the Tower of London, and it was mad. It was my capital, and it was the first time I'd ever done a tour. The only time I'd ever been through the centre of London was either stealing, grafting, or in a sweatbox, the prison van. I'd never been there, as a tourist. And we went all the way Tower of London, on the Thames, a trip down the Thames, and then we got onto the big eye, the London Eye. It's like a big Ferris wheel. And we got all the way to the very top, and he just turned round and he looked at me and he said, "How did we get here? How did we get here? We're on top of the world with David D." And I'm just blubbering me. I'm crying up and down. How can this get any better? How can my life get any better? But we went to a meeting. We met Anthony that night again. And I went home, and it did get better, because what I'd done was, I drove home, I got home, I woke up the next morning, I wrote in my journal, which I'd been doing since before I come into recovery. I started to read my Just for Today and my basic text, which I've done every day since I got here. I sent out the readings to my sponsorship family. I did everything what I've been doing in the beginning. I did that and started to go through my day, what was in front of me. And that's the stuff I still do up to this day. That's why I know my best day hasn't happened yet, because I thought that couldn't get better than that day. But by coming home and carry on doing the same, my ritual in the morning, keeping connected to the fellowship, keeping working with my sponsor, keeping doing my service and my step work and attending regular meetings, and carrying on with this belief that anything was possible. In 2016, Dan come over and stayed with us for 10 days, and he was the closing speaker at our area convention. We built up a really, really good friendship. And then, of course, in 2017, I ended up sat in Sugarloaf on a white pristine beach with a volleyball game going on, an NA meeting going on the left, and I looked up at the sky and said, "How did I get here? How did I get here?" Because remember, I was that junkie. I still have to go, when I'm going through customs at the airport, I still have to wear them glasses and the moustache. Well, you've got to do some things. No, I don't. I'm lucky today that, I'm lucky I get to travel. So I ended up here in the spiritual key. I come here like it was almost like a pilgrimage. When CJ said that earlier on, when he gave me that bracelet, and it was like that's my connection. That's where I need to go. I need to attend that convention. I need to pay homage to the people of I now know the Conch Republic. Thank you for making this event happen, and thanks for it happening then. And it's really important. I try to remember that when we speak at events like this, we don't know who's listening. We don't know, especially when they're being recorded. We don't know if somebody in their room is going to one day listen and hear something what you say, what's going to change the path of their recovery. And that's what happened to me. My eyes were open. My eyes were open not just because of my past. it didn't mean that I couldn't have a future. Do you know what I mean? I could not allow my past to keep defining my future, and no matter, you know, how much I could sit in self-pity and say, oh well, yeah, or procrastinate or be lazy, the reality was there was a life beyond my wildest dreams was available to me, and it's available to every single person in here. You know, no matter what year you're in, you're recovering, no matter how old you are, whatever it is that you wanted to do, you've got to get up and do it. You know, what happened after that, you know, my travelling really took off. You know, I wanted to see so much of this world. Everywhere I go, I always check to see what conventions on, what NA meetings are on. You know, I was talking to somebody earlier, I was in a meeting in Bosnia, Sarajevo, and the where the hotel was, it had a sign and it said on it, 1994 Winter Olympic Village. No, was it 1986 or something? Winter Olympic Village, 1994 besieged city. You know what I mean? They had it bad. They had like 3/4 of their city was surrounded by Serbian tanks all aimed in on them, and the only quarter what they could use was the UN had it, I think, for the airport. And it was amazing to go and see that stuff, but they only had one NA meeting. They had the convention there, the winter convention, but they only had one NA meeting. So he goes to this meeting, and there's a girl who was chairing the meeting. She said to us that she can translate anything from English into Bosnian, anything from Bosnian into English. And so we let her do that all the way through the meeting. We're sharing, the Bosnian people are sharing, and right at the very end, this Bosnian guy started sharing that he was in a real bad place. His girlfriend, or his wife, sorry, they were splitting up, and but he was keeping his recovery, you know, strong. He was coming to the meeting, and that got my sponsor at the time was going through something similar, so we got him to talk to him, but, you know, translated. So anyway, we woke up the next day and we was having breakfast, and someone mentioned the meeting, and they said, yeah, wasn't that mad last night? That was mad. And they went, I know, did you hear that guy sharing at the end? And he went, I know. And then someone said, yeah, but you know who it was, don't you? And we was like, what do you mean? And he went, well, the girl with the blonde hair who was doing the translating, that was his wife. Oh my God, we couldn't believe it. But I still don't know to this day whether she actually did translate all what he said. You know, you can't blame her, can you? But no matter where you go in the world, if any you're travelling anywhere, there's Narcotics Anonymous is everywhere. It really is. And then if it's not, look what happened. You know, I'm going to move on to that. You know. So 2017, my love affair started with, you know, coming over to the States, but also with this convention. And as you know, God bless, in 2017, in the hurricane, what called Irma, was it? They really wiped this place out, and so much destruction. You know, I remember, you know, praying, and I had it all in my thoughts, and I know that the world did as well. And, you know, we didn't know whether the spiritual retreat had happened again, and in 2019 we even come anyway, even though there was none. We come at, like, paying our, you know, pilgrimage to the Keys, and we went to the pizza event like we did the other night, and we had a wonderful time here again. You know, we loved it. Went to the meetings here, you know, Richard's a lovely man, and Omar and Mike, all the people who do service in this fellowship here. And all we wanted to do was come back here and be where we are today, you know, with the spiritual retreat, the Recovery in Paradise convention back on, and then the COVID hit, and it was like a really tough time. You know, one thing what was really mad though was, within, you know, hours or within minutes of the lockdown being announced for the worldwide, Narcotics Anonymous stood up. We stood up quicker than anybody else. Yeah. We had meetings, there's links going about everywhere, and before we knew it, we was able to connect, because our lives depend on it. That's why we were so proactive. That's why we were so quick. And what was mad, you know, a lot of people in here was most probably have been on meetings and met people from overseas, and it's really good, and now you're getting the chance to see some of them. You know, I'd already met many people from overseas, and then going on to their meetings was H. You know, I'd get some of you guys to come and share on my home group, and sometimes I'd sit up in the middle of the night to share on yours. Oh, that was tough. But you did the same for me, you know what I mean? And it was a really, really tough time for a lot of us, and a lot of our members didn't make it, and a lot of our members in the UK didn't make it either. You know, but we did, you know, and we kind of come through the other side. I know that we still have some kind of scares and that, but when we was told that this convention was going back on, I was like, I made sure that this was going to be, you know, the place I needed to be. I needed to be here. I needed to get... CJ said to us, and Lisa was on about it today, you know, I love the friends I made when I was here in 2017. They're still so, you know, me and Jesper's been around the world together, and, you know, Lisa and me, we're always kept in contact, saying when the keys is back on, because CJ said to us, things will never be the same, you know, and I really truly believe that, you know, that this is a convention that you just can't get out your mind. You know, when you leave here, you'll remember it, you'll remember the people, you'll remember just being able to sit in such a wonderful, idyllic place, you know, and I know today, you know, that I'm blessed. And I don't want, you know, for people who's new, recovery is not all this, you know, wonderful experience like I've had, or it seems like I've had to go through some tough stuff in recovery too, you know, bereavement. I always remember when my twin and my mum met me off the train to tell me that my dad had died, you know, and it was the Wednesday night of our home group at the time, and once we'd had a hug, it was, come on, let's go to the home group. And we went to the home group, and you guys loved me. You guys held us. One of the members drove my brother all the way to Scotland straight away. It was about 220 miles. I had to go to work the next day, but then travel up and join him. You know, illness, you know, I've not looked after myself really, really great. A lot of things we don't talk about in recovery, like that son who I'd not seen for 13 years, and then I ended up getting in contact with. We had such, you know, an opportunity. I had an opportunity of being a parent when I was a shit parent in active addiction. I found out I was a shit parent in recovery too. I really was, and it wasn't easy to say that, you know. For a long time I didn't want to write about it, you know, and after 13 years of having my son in my life, he's 27 now, he just turned around one day and said, I don't want you in my life no more. And it is really tough, you know. I'm what's the word for it, I'm allowing him to have his space. I drop him his birthday card off and his Christmas off, but the reality is I'll hang back. But I know you guys have taught me, if I wait, if I practice being patient, if I keep being available, and if I keep clean, you know, I'll be here ready when he does come, because I believe he will, you know. And he's a lovely boy, he's doing really well for himself, you know. I am proud of him. I believe somewhere as well he's proud of me. But so I'm going to start wrapping this up, but I mentioned my guy from, you know, Citrus Heights in Sacramento. You know, we've ended up really, really good friends, and when I told him that I was coming to speak here, he said, oh David, he said, I'm so blessed, I'm so glad for you. He said, but he said, I can't make it. He said, but you know what, it's unfortunate. He said, but I'm at Daytona the week before. But now thank God I've got a Florida fairy godfather, and his name's Mark H, and I love him so much. He's a great guy. And when he knew I was coming, and he said, yep, I'm going to meet you, he said, do you fancy Daytona? Oh, I said, do I? I couldn't believe it. I got off the A380 double-decker jumbo. Wow, I'm like a little kid on that. And then I made my way and met Mark, and we drove all the way to Daytona. And I'm at Daytona, and I just phoned Dan up and said, "Hi Dan," and he said, "Oh, you're in Florida now. I wish you all the best for next week." I said, "Dan, I'm outside the Ocean building in Daytona." He couldn't believe it. He was like, "No way!" And he come running out, and we hugged it out, and we spent some time together. And then on the Saturday, he come up to me and he said, "David," he said, "in Florida it's tradition that people introduce you to speak." And he said, "I'd like you to introduce me tomorrow," because he was doing the closing share. So if he was in Daytona last week, you most probably remember hearing the guy who shared on the Sunday. He's the guy who carried the message to me indirectly through a tape, through a recording. And it was amazing being able to get up and speak and say them similar kind of words what CJ said to me, though I took longer. I wouldn't give him the microphone. Well, I didn't know whether he was going to have me here the week after. I didn't know whether I was going to get here. I better take my chance while I've got it. And it's just amazing the things what, you know, by positioning myself, by putting myself in the middle of the boat, by continuing to acknowledge a God in my understanding in my life, by continuing to have you guys close by, continuing, that twin brother who I've got, Dominic, he celebrates 13 years on June the 20th. He's amazing. He's another amazing member of this fellowship. Unfortunately he's got a girlfriend now. No, fortunately she's a lovely girl, but at the same time he couldn't come to this trip. But he's been over there with me a few times. We went to the Greater New York Convention. It was amazing. We actually come to Safrakna, but it was called off because of the Hurricane Dorian, but we had another amazing time here. Last year we got to spend an amazing 2 weeks with Anna and Al over in San Diego. We went to the World Service and where the first meeting of Narcotics Anonymous was held, where Bob B's first meeting. We went to see all the spots. Dwight took us, another brother who I love dearly. Like I said to you in the beginning, the only reason that I'm here today is because I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. There's people in this fellowship. If you're in your local meeting, anything what's going on for you, please put your head above the parapet. Put your head above the parapet and ask, because there's somebody in that meeting would have either gone through or is going through exactly the same thing. You never ever need to be alone again, and I'm just so blessed that I'm here today. Thank you everybody for listening to me. I hope that somebody got something off the message. I love you all.
Fantastic.